One of the great things Better Call Saul has given us is another peek behind the curtain for Gus Fring. We knew a little about him and his origins from Breaking Bad, but over the last few years, we've gotten to know him in a new, terrifying light. Before Better Call Saul, here's what we knew of Gus's origins. He grew up in Chile where he met Max, someone he formed a close bond with. In the time of Breaking Bad, it was heavily implied, and further implied in Better Call Saul, that their bond was romantic. Gus lifted Max out of poverty and paid for his education in chemistry. In the 80s, the two of them fled to Mexico and founded Los Pollos Hermanos, which they used as a front to cook crystal meth. They hoped to partner with the cartel and convince Don Eladio to shift from cocaine to their meth, which they saw as the future of the drug trade. So they got his attention by handing out samples, in the Don's territory without his permission. As punishment for the indiscretion and manipulating him into a meeting, Eladio ordered Hector Salamanca to kill Max in front of Gus, which Hector was happy to do. Gus himself was spared because Eladio knows who he is, implying important connections in Chile, and as Gus wept, Hector ordered him to look at his dead partner. Words Gus would echo back to Hector in the years that followed, ordering Hector to look at me. From then on, it seems that Gus took on a calm and focused demeanor. He became a ruthless leader in the cartel world, and as we saw in Breaking Bad, he would eventually take his revenge, killing Juan Bolsa with the help of an assassin, killing Don Eladio with some poisoned Zafiro Añejo, though he was denied his final act of revenge, when Hector blew them both up before Gus could administer a lethal injection. Gus's origins in Chile may be somewhat mysterious, but after that, things seem relatively straightforward. After Max was taken from him, Gus decided that he would do whatever it took to have his revenge. He would take the drug empire away from the people who took away his love, then he would kill them, and for Hector, the man who actually pulled the trigger, Gus would make him suffer. By the time Gus and Hector exploded in that nursing home, Hector had been forced to sit by as every last member of the Salamanca family was killed, as far as we and Gus know. The family he was so proud of, which once held such power in the cartel world, was destroyed, and Gus's revenge was nearly complete. In pursuit of that revenge, Gus was focused and would do whatever it took to keep his business running, no matter how ruthless. Season 4 opened with Gus killing Victor with a box cutter, and 10 episodes later, he threatened to kill Walt's infant daughter. How do you make Gus more terrifying than that? Better Call Saul found a way. First, by showing us the extent to which Gus needed Hector Salamanca to suffer. At the end of Season 2, Mike was going to assassinate Hector, but Gus stopped him. Midway through Season 3, he tells Mike why.
A bullet to the head would have been far too humane.
At the end of the season, Hector suffers a stroke after Nacho replaced his medicine with ibuprofen. Once again, Gus has an opportunity to simply stand by and let his rival die, but instead, almost as though acting on impulse, without a second's thought, Gus rushed to administer CPR. He saved Hector Salamanca's life. In the next season, Hector was comatose, and that did not work for Gus. He needed Hector awake, because unconscious, Hector cannot suffer or bear witness to Gus's revenge. So Gus got the best doctor he could find, and with a sizable donation to her hospital, convinced her to work with Hector. Under the doctor's care, Hector did eventually wake up, but it was at first unclear how awake he really was. As the doctor continued to work with Hector, Gus saw what he needed. Hector purposefully knocked over a cup so the nurse would be forced to pick it up, and he could leer at her. This simple act was written off as an unconscious impulse, but Gus saw it for what it was. Confirmation that Hector, although unable to walk or speak, was still there. So, despite the doctor's promise that Hector could speak again if she continued her work, Gus immediately ended the treatment. He didn't need Hector to speak, he just needed him to be aware of his suffering and eventual death. In Breaking Bad, We saw Gus as a professional that never let anything personal get in the way of business. His thirst for revenge was eventually revealed as his Achilles heel, but here, Better Call Saul shows just how far that went. He saved the man's life and reconstructed his mind just so that mind could suffer. These are not the actions of someone who is in control. Where Gus's revenge came off as a personal need or something important to him in Breaking Bad, here it comes off as something more. It comes off as pathological. That's further cemented when Gus tells the comatose Hector a story about his childhood. Gus's family was poor and always hungry. But there was a scrawny lucuma tree, barely alive. His family had given up on it, but at age 7, Gus became fixated. He was going to nurse that tree back to health. And he did. They finally ate its fruit, and even began selling it in town. But one day, the fruit was gone, eaten by a coati, an animal the size of a large house cat. So Gus built a snare. It caught the coati. The animal managed to escape, but broke its leg in the process and hid under the house. Gus knew it would eventually show itself, so he waited, still and silent, and when it came out, Gus grabbed the animal. Finally, he concludes his story with the horrifying line,
The merciful thing would have been to kill it. I kept it. It lived for quite some time. I believe you will wake, Hector.
Gus's decision to torture this small animal was not a carefully considered decision. Obviously, that animal had no idea it was eating Gus's fruit. It was just hungry. It's an animal. But that didn't matter. Gus was wronged, and his answer then was the same as now. He will inflict suffering on those who wrong him, human, coati, or otherwise. What's really terrifying is that, yes, he was a child, but you can't write it off as an impulsive or emotional response. He didn't immediately lash out in uncontrollable rage. He was patient and deliberate. He made the decision to torture a small animal, then sat with that decision for hours and possibly months, depending on how long it lived. But he never reconsidered. He never saw the folly of his actions. In the conscience of Gus Fring, something is missing. Now, most of us, me included, are not experts on human psychology, but we all have the innate sense that when a child takes to hurting small animals, it may not be a good sign. It could be an early warning that something is going wrong. Maybe they're growing up without a full sense of empathy or remorse. By the way, it is possible that the story Gus told is not entirely true. Perhaps it's just an intimidation tactic for Hector, but I read it as basically true. In the scene when Gus tells the story, he isn't even sure Hector can hear him, so he seems to partially tell this story for himself, relishing the revenge he took at age 7 and reassuring himself he will taste an even sweeter revenge with Hector. And the story tracks with his actions. The level of patience required by Gus's revenge in Breaking Bad, 20 years in the making, plus the effort, time, and resources he invested during Better Call Saul, it feels like a natural extension of his experience with the coati. As a child, he had to be patient for hours waiting for the animal. As a grown man, having honed his craft, he could now be patient for years. It is important to note, though, that Gus is not without warmth or without emotions. It appears that he did truly love Max. Better Call Saul also made that clear in Dedicado a Max, when we see that Gus funds a village built around a fountain dedicated to Max. It seems that he keeps the village as a Shangri-La, away from his business dealings. And I think the warmer side to Gus is here too, with Max. In Albuquerque and the outside world, Gus is all business, ostensibly the chicken and meth business, but in reality, the revenge business. But here, in this isolated place, is Gus's love and humanity. To love someone requires empathy, and it requires the things you would have to lack in order to savor suffering the way Gus does. So I have to wonder if whatever Gus lacked as a child, he eventually found. Perhaps his bond with Max helped make Gus whole, and losing Max broke him. staring into Max's cold, dead eyes. With Hector's boot on his neck, Gus rediscovered his sadism and would never be the same again. From then on, he was no longer the boy who would foster a lucuma tree to good health, or the man who would help talent flourish by putting Max through school. Instead, he became the Gus who would torture a small animal, or resurrect a man's mind just enough to be aware of its own pain. Peter Gould recently told The Hollywood Reporter that, "I think by the time you finish watching Better Call Saul, you're going to see Breaking Bad in a very different light." I have to say, this is already true for me, and Gus Fring is one of the best examples of it. He was always a great opposing force to Walt in Breaking Bad, but somehow, the writers found a way to elevate him even further in Better Call Saul, so he has become even more fascinating and more terrifying than ever. And there's still another season to go, so who knows what else we'll learn about him. I don't know about you, but between the Kawati reveal and the arson he committed last season, I'm starting to get a little worried. Okay, I think we can wrap it up there. Make sure you're subscribed to keep up with our Week of Saul, celebrating the final season with a new Better Call Saul video every day this week. With that, thank you for watching, and see you on the next One Take.